Well, good morning, Warriors. How are we? Welcome to day 2 of AusCERT2019. Trust you enjoyed our dinner last night, judging from the noise emanating from the bar in the foyer till well into the wee hours. We were having a cracking time last night, and why not? But today, heads down, working hard, packed agenda. Can I start by acknowledging the Common Berry people who are traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet today. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and welcome any First Australians who are joining us. The emergency evacuation procedure is the same as yesterday. In the unlikely event of an emergency, remain calm, exit the building following the instructions of the staff. We'll assemble near Acacia Avenue on the southern side of the hotel. Bathrooms, if you're here for the first time today, out, round and around again. Left and left, you'll find them indicated on the wall there. Please turn your phones to silent, and as much as possible, look up and engage with our speakers today, because we are not mucking around with this first guest speaker. I've been lucky enough in my time as an MC to introduce a lot of different people with a lot of different job titles. I've introduced CEOs, CIOs, I've introduced Nobel laureates to stage. I've never introduced a former security empress. I sat opposite this woman at dinner last night. If there's someone for whom the title is befitting of former security empress, it is her. Here to talk on the topic of how security teams can evolve to win friends and influence people. From Tendermint, please welcome the wonderful Jessy Irwin.
I'm totally terrified. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the wonderful welcome. Australia, you're kind of amazing and cool, and I don't want to go home, by the way. No one tell my husband I said that. And thank you all for getting up after what was quite the party last night and coming to attend my talk. Today, I am going to cover a whole bunch of stories and opinions and thoughts and feelings about what we do as security teams. I think that we're at a point as an industry where we really have to step back and think about our identity and our work, where we are now and where we want to go. So that's what this is. So you're probably wondering why you have to listen to me today. So I might as well explain. When I have to talk about my job, the only way I can reasonably explain it, whether I'm talking to a bunch of engineers or I'm talking to 8-year-olds who just want me to hack their homework, is to say that I protect people from software, and I protect software from people. I have an extremely non-traditional background to be a security engineer. When I was in university, I studied foreign language, I studied art history, I studied archaeology. I worked in a library, I worked in a museum. I'm ground zero for inventory being a security problem. I started working on communications in technology when I first moved to the Silicon Valley. So I used to be one of those marketers that everyone swears sells the snake oil. By the way, marketing team is amazing, and you better be nice to them or I will get you. When I did that work, I learned quite a bit about risk, security controls, privacy, and generally all of these topics that are really, really hard for the average person to understand and wrap their mind around, when really all they want to do is make their iPhone work or figure out how to stand up a VPN so they can watch Netflix from Canada instead of Australia or the US. Because of this, I have a lot of non-traditional ideas about security too. I am the first person to start standing up and screaming that security is way more than just finding all of the bugs in code. We're supposed to stop the bugs from getting into the code sometimes too, I thought, maybe. We know quite a lot about how humans work, and I think that we should start designing security for what we know about people, not against them. If we know, for example, people are going to do awful things with passwords, we should probably just plan systems around awful passwords and see what we get out of it. And finally, one of my other crazy ideas is that usability is very much a security problem. And more of our security problems that we face stem from IT mishaps than some evil, awful, sneaky nation-state adversary getting up in our business and wrecking our Monday through Friday and our on-call weekends. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few things today. I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into what security is, because I don't really even know if we know what it is, to be honest, but it's been around for a long time. I'll talk a little bit about how we can win friends. I mean, I did say in the title, we probably need to cover this a little bit. Maybe how to influence people, but not in a creepy way, in a good way. I don't know what we're going to do in the middle, but somewhere we'll get to the point where we talk about how we actually improve outcomes and how we get to make more of a difference. And I don't know, like maybe go kick everybody's butt and be really competitive and win for a change. So, okay, what is this security thing that we are doing? Security has existed pretty much since we have as humans. It's been around at least 50,000 years longer than computers. And a lot of people these days think that security is a huge technology question. It's not, actually, in my opinion. Those people who do tell us that it is a technology problem, they're also the people saying that software is eating the world. News for you, we've only had software for like less than 100 years. There were a lot of us around before that, and we engaged in a lot of different behaviors as people that really demonstrate security principles. One thing I've learned in the work that I've done is that our beliefs in security as individuals, as practitioners, as consumers, as people who buy iPhones and want to chuck them out the window when they don't work, they're about as deeply held as our belief in politics and religion. Our ideas about security are very much a product of our life experiences. And because of that, what we might consider to be right or wrong or correct in our work is extremely relative to this. This is something you know to be a very, very self-evident truth. If you've ever gotten into a conversation about a password manager on our InfoSec water cooler named Twitter. Because people, I found, when I worked at 1Password, would basically choose to reject or accept a password manager as if they were choosing between the old gods, the new gods, the flying dragon gods, or no gods for me, thanks, like it's an episode of Game of Thrones. What's interesting about this is when you start talking to people online about password managers, or you see a discussion going on, the moment someone disagrees with a personal choice of which product, which tool, whether you should even use that class of software or not, it turns into an all-out holy war of authentication. What's interesting about this is that the choice of whether to use a password manager or not is an extremely personal choice, and for many people, it's also the most important decision they're going to make about their online security. And if there's one thing that is crystal clear, if you criticize the most important choice that someone makes about their security, if you make them feel bad for using, purple pass instead of yellow pass, there will be hell to pay. It's an insult to the intelligence of most people, to the experiences that led them to making that decision or rejecting that decision, and it is all around probably one of the most interesting technology adoption cases in our industry. So, okay, I mentioned security's been around for about 50,000 years, give or take. I mentioned that we've seen lots of evidence of security behaviors, but there's something that's really interesting that I can never look away from. When people started living in constructed settlements about 17,000 years ago, they started building walls to protect themselves almost instantly. I think the first thing I figured out how to break when I started using a computer was called a firewall, and suddenly all of these magical things made sense to me. When people started living in settlements, they also started securing their valuables by hiding them. We see evidence of this to this day when archaeologists are going and digging and looking for forensic evidence of past peoples, and they start finding coin hoards with more money than they could have ever imagined, because people had to protect the thing most valuable to them. And it's not like they had a crazy modern banking system and debit cards and all of these fabulous tokens for payment that we get to have now. Another thing that's really interesting, some of the earliest evidence of security comes from locks. And there are so many locks when you look in the historical record that come from as far back as ancient Egypt. something I think is really interesting is these days, we run around with our key cards to get into our office building. We have our YubiKeys and our U2F tokens. People used to wear their keys to their locks like a pendant, have them made into a ring, or put them in a place close to them for safekeeping so that they were always physically secure. And it was a little bit of an indicator of wealth, but really what it said was you were bound to have something valuable enough that needed protecting if you had one of these things. It reminds me a little bit now of when I see someone get really excited and make a pair of earrings out of YubiKeys, because that's a pretty good way not to lose them, and also they're kind of fun. And it also reminds me of how we see people hand out business cards that have their PGP keys on them, even though, sorry guys, I don't think I've used PGP in a good 5 years. Another thing that's interesting in terms of security behavior before computers ever existed, tamper-evident locks have been around for a really long time. When it wasn't good enough to just have a key to get in or get out, because we knew people could probably break into a lock, someone designed locks that said, hey, actually, someone messed with me in the 17th century. So think about that for a second. We talk a lot about, authentication bypasses and breaking into things and evil maid attacks, but these problems existed well before computers did. And the reason we had these particular security behaviors is because we were trying to overcome human problems with technology, not the other way around. Another thing that I think quite a bit about when I'm thinking about security is these Sealstones. So 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, when people were still sending little bits of paper back and forth, long before we ever got into any crypto wars on any continent and had computers to worry about, people were sending their little bits of paper or packages that were stamped with wax. And the little mark on there would say, hey, this is from Sarah. Sarah sent you some nice wine. Here's how you know it's her. There we are. It was a form of identification, and it was a little bit of a form of authentication. There are also these really interesting seal scrolls that basically look like a bead. They're about this big when you see them in a museum, and you could roll one across hot wax to get a very specific signature. It's almost like the ancient version of that Amazon tape that they put on all of those cardboard boxes we all have to throw out the back door and hope that the recycling man won't pick up. So if we think we have it bad with phishing now, if we think we have it bad with trying to make sure that encrypted messages are signed the right way, think about how difficult it would have been a few hundred years ago or a few thousand years ago to verify information, to get ahead of someone who's got a forgery scheme, to figure out whether something is fake or not. Letters being intercepted and opened were still a problem. We're all freaking out about that with what's happening with our end-to-end encryption, and does TLS do the things we think the TLS does? Or did somebody do something to it that they shouldn't have? And then finally, about 1,000 years later, after the Sealstones weren't doing it anymore, there's another human behavior that popped up that's really interesting. So this is called a letter lock. And what it does is pretty simple. The person who would write a letter would actually end up folding it in a very specific way that they designed to show evidence of tampering. It's a little bit like now how when we open up Signal and someone's security keys changed, except in this case, the security key would be looking at whether the wax that would make its way down into the middle of the fold had been compromised, whether it was grainy, whether it had broken. That would be the evidence of whether something was messed with or not. Okay, so we went through this whole thing about, what does security look like before the computers? But the thing that's really important to take away is we have a lot of ideas as security people about what security is, and they are based pretty much in our political beliefs and almost our religious beliefs. It's that serious and that core of an identifying factor for us when we move forward and we do our work. The problem with that is sometimes we get into very big arguments about principles. And when we get into those really big arguments about principles, we lose sight of the tiny things we need to be doing day to day to actually get the job done and to actually drive incremental improvement. So now we have to tell you how to make some friends, win some influence, get some people on our side. So that's this part of the talk. One thing that's really important for security teams to think about is where power comes from. There's some political science in here, there's some anthropology in here. This is all of those classes that lots of people did not want to take at university. But a lot of secrets into what makes your team successful come from all of these squishy human factors that everyone likes to call soft skills. Pro tip, they are not soft. They are extremely hard to get right and very, very squishy. So, if we're asking, where power comes from as a security team, it's interesting to look at the political world because there's a never-ending debate about whether hard power or soft power is what wins among the nation states. It's a question of, should we be using armies and weaponry? Or should we be advancing diplomacy, relationships, discussions, incentive alignment, writing policy documents, and wooing each other back and forth to see if we can get to where we need to go? In our work as security practitioners, it's not quite that messy. I don't think any of us have armies that we roll out when we're about to really go to war with the IT team. If you do, can I borrow them? But in our work, the question for us about power really comes from another place, and it's this. Are we a team that says yes, or are we a team that says no? So I live in the Silicon Valley, and where I live, there are a lot of teams that take pride in the fact that they have the ability to veto the release of any product that comes out of their company. In fact, they get really excited about this if you interview with them, and they start talking about how security is so important and it's such a top priority. Except, I don't think that's how any of this works. Because if you as a team have the ability to rip something right out of the hands of hundreds of people who have been working on it for a really long time, just because you said so 5 minutes before it's going to go public, where were you when people were getting started with this work? How did you get the ability to roll in and say no if you didn't actually show up at the beginning of the development process with a set of requirements, with a set of things to watch out for, with information, with resources, and with all of this security knowledge we have that can help us make the most unbelievable, creative, bonkers ideas come to life? Some people think it's amazing to be able to roll in and completely destroy, an entire revenue-generating product stream for 2 quarters just because they're really not excited about the way somebody rotated a key somewhere. Never mind that the key in question is a relatively low-risk asset, and the development roadmap is going to have that ripped out within 6 months of the product shipping. Something that's really important to think about here is this. Security teams wonder when they're the team of no, why no one wants to come and hang out, why they have difficulty getting traction within their organizations. And the answer is kind of simple. In fact, something you can learn by playing with Legos. If you are the team that comes in and you literally take everyone's toys away, or you tell them that they are playing with their toys wrong, or that thing they made for fun is total crap, of course they're not going to want to hang out with you. Of course they are not going to want to listen to you. Of course they are not going to share their Legos with you. And I don't know about you guys, but it sucks to not be part of a Lego party. So on another scale, we have the issue of our profession globally just not being successful. If you look at the conversations we have in our beloved InfoSec water cooler named Twitter, they look a little something like this more often than not. And there's a lot of arguing that comes from this place of security teams thinking to be successful, they need to be in control. They need to be playing politics. They need to be jockeying for power. The problem with that, for anyone who spent way too much time in European history, is that eventually absolute power, unchecked power, it ends up being a really toxic hell stew. It ends up creating an environment where you don't have psychological safety for your team, for your colleagues, for your ideas, and you don't feel like you can speak up or you can actually advocate for the things that will make a real difference. No one succeeds in that environment. Not on a community level, not on a team level, and most definitely not an industry level. If you've ever worked for a team whose enforcement mechanisms were a bunch of policies that were locked away in a drawer that no one had access to, you've experienced this very, very specific, exquisite form of pain. And it stinks, because it's a total double standard. Security teams can scream all day long about transparency and doing all of this wonderful stuff, but then when someone wants to come back and audit, they use the control they have and say, no, you can't question us. That's not cool, especially when most of the time the security team already has visibility into everything inside of an organization, but they can't even turn around and share their thinking because they don't want to be questioned and don't want to give away Legos or share them with anyone else. If we want to make friends, we're gonna have to learn how to play together nicely with others. If we don't want regulators walking in and taking our toys away forever, we're gonna have to not only learn how to play nice, we're gonna have to learn how to take care of our toys better. At the end of the day, as a security team, it is up to us to define our charter, to define our identity, and to decide who we want to be as individuals. And if we approach others from a place of control, and we have a top-down authoritarian point of view, we are not going to get anything done, which is basically something that we see play out day to day in our own sphere. So another thing that you can do, especially if you don't want to be a control-minded organization, switch your charter. Security should be about empowerment. It should be about finding the right way to say yes. It should be about helping people make impossible, crazy, creative, bonkers ideas become a reality in a safe way. One way that you can do this as a practitioner is to think about your team charter and find ways to provide expertise and consulting to other teams in your organization. But you can also think about how to focus very specifically on your user. We all spend a lot of time at conferences, reading papers, going through presentations, thinking about attackers. We think about attackers all day long. However, the vast majority of the security incidents we have to clean up aren't because some teenager somewhere hacked a mainframe. They're most likely because somebody didn't go through a training. Someone misconfigured something somewhere. A setting that was really important got hidden in a menu that no one ever looked at. Or, quite frankly, we just forgot because a process broke somewhere and no one ever reviewed it and figured out whether the right things were happening to control a particular part of business risk. So there's another thing that can help you become more of a service organization. There's a really common assumption that security teams are supposed to know everything. Now, I don't know about you guys and gals, but I don't know anything. Mostly because of the Socrates guy and his friends Aristotle and all those other smart people who are just like, yeah, don't bother, you're never gonna learn everything. Just put yourself in a place where you are constantly willing to learn and maybe once in a while relearn all of the stuff that you forgot. That usually happens on a 10-year cycle. Something that tends to happen with security teams more often than not these days is they walk into the room and they think that it is their job to be the smartest people there and to show off that they know more than everyone else. This is a huge problem because nobody wants to be friends with a know-it-all. It's nice to know lots of stuff. It's not nice when you demonstrate that knowledge in a way that makes people feel dumb and it makes them not want to work with you. As a service organization, to be security-minded, we should actually take a Socratic approach. We should be asking questions, we should be investigating, we should be discovering, we should be learning with our teams, but not doing things for them as if, we are the maid or we are the janitor and we are always there to clean up. We should be step in step with our teams, not behind them, not sneaking off in a corner saying ugly things about them. It's up to us if our colleagues are actually repeat customers of our organization. It's up to us if we make people feel bad for clicking on a link or installing the malware. Because if we make them feel bad, they don't come back and tell us when they did it by accident again. They just hide it, and we have much bigger problems that we have to figure out that are much more costly. Another way to be a little bit more of a service-minded organization is to think about how we educate others. I don't know about any of you, but I hate to be told. You cannot tell me what to do. You must politely suggest in the right way that doesn't make it sound like you're bossing me around like my mom did, or you're going to be in trouble. Possibly a personal leadership flaw, but practically everyone I work with is the same way. So what that means for me as an individual on my team is that I had to start educating and seeding ideas with people. It's one thing if it's time for us to institute a secure development lifecycle, and I walk into a meeting with my developers and say, okay guys, you're doing this now. It's another thing if I let my junior developers experience the frustration of having to find, patch, triage, manage bugs, or sweep up a few things on the bug bounty program, and they come to me and they say, hey, wait, we keep finding all of these bugs, and we wanted to write all of this automation to find bugs, but isn't it smarter if we just don't make bugs at all? Usually the young developers are like, yeah, let's just throw the computers in the ocean now. Doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But instead of coming to them and telling them what to do, I can say, okay, well, this is how we stop bugs from happening before they start. This is what you need to know about the language you're using. This is what you need to know about sanitizing inputs. These are the 3 or 4 things you can think about in the next month. And if you don't have any bugs in these particular classes, not only will I give you more money, we are going to have a fantastic party with what we didn't spend on bug bounty budget. Silly stuff, but at the end of the day, instead of telling my teams what to do and bossing them around, I can lead them where they need to go and let them figure things out. It is a much better spot to be in if we are service-minded and we are coaching people through solving problems and giving them the critical skills that they need for thinking and problem solving, rather than just dragging them through, giving them checklists, and forcing them to do what we say. No one likes that. So another thing that's really important is knowledge sharing. There's something that went on in my organization that was a surprising gift and something that I'm extremely proud of. In my organization, I was the first security hire, and I have a bunch of security-minded developers, but I had 7 audits over a year-long period because we were about to launch some pretty critical code. And all of my audits were looking at different layers of my code, but instead of doing what I had experienced in other security teams, which was sitting in the corner, running the audits, never talking to developers, never making them part of the process, I decided I was going to step back and I was going to be the quietest person in the whole security audit. I grabbed my developers and said, guys, we have a kickoff call. Let's go. I've already scoped this. I have already taken care of all of the administrative work. Here's how the process of the audit is going to go. But show up for the kickoff calls. Show up for the weekly syncs. Come and talk to the people who are evaluating your code and see what this is really about. So I thought this might be a little bit of a drag because security audit is expensive. Hourly, oh my gosh, I don't even want to know how much money I spent. But my developers were able to actually be part of a process that previously had scared the crap out of them. Instead of arguing with me about how dumb documentation was, they were able to see that auditors needed documentation because they needed to have some form of information to help them know how the code's supposed to work. Once my developers saw documentation as a trust problem, an integrity problem, and a security problem, my documentation got to be 1,000,000 times better, to the point that I actually got compliments on it around audit 5 or audit 6 of the process, because my teams were actually motivated to do that work themselves instead of me running along and yelling at them to go write some more and do their homework. Another thing that helped us out quite a bit too was that I was able to basically get my teams to start thinking about threat modeling and architecture diagramming. It's one thing if I have to try to attend every single meeting in my organization when someone's talking about designing a thing. It's another if I can scale myself, if I can create education opportunities, and I can actually give them ways to lead their own work, identify their own risk, and then come to me when they need a little bit of proofreading, rather than when they need me to come and lead every single thing and be a single point of failure in all of our processes. The other thing that was great is that instead of having a bunch of developers who were mad they had to show up for a 6 a.m. call, I had a whole bunch more allies. No one actually knew how security audits worked, so the whole process was less scary. We ended up having really great engineering conversations instead of having political warfare over someone asking, why did you code this way, as if you were not wearing pants, which comes up in a review once in a while. And it was nice to be able to give a behind-the-scenes look at why things have to be done a specific way. Instead of demanding from my team, they must execute on this 1,000-step fan dance just right. They could see what was important, what wasn't important, and they were able to adjust the way that they performed, and they actually became more accountable at the end of the day to explaining why they made specific decisions, and they wrote better tests. So there's another thing if you want to win friends and influence people that's really important. You have to put your best face forward. I don't mean this as hygiene advice. I actually mean this on a very practical note. Security practitioners, we are compelled to be transparent. We will explain how something works to the nth degree, to the point that if we are talking to non-technical folks, we might accidentally tell them everything wrong with what we are asking them to do before they actually get a chance to do it. The best place to think about this is how we have discussions about two-factor authentication. We have wars about password managers, but we have some ugly battles over two-factor authentication. The problem is that some two-factor authentication is better than none for the vast majority of people. Those people generally aren't us. So when we start to talk to users about, how to protect themselves, we will tell them, you should use two-factor authentication, but the one that's most prevalent everywhere on the internet, the one that sends you a text message, that's crap. Actually, let me tell you everything wrong with it. Let me take away every good reason you might have to change your behavior and do something that provides an incremental improvement to your personal security or to our organizational security. Let me just tell you all the warts and then leave you so confused that you don't know what to do, so you don't do anything at all. As practitioners, we have to do better than that. Because when we remove people's incentive to change behavior that we really need to see changed, we basically stab ourselves right in the heart as teams. Also, we have to put our best face forward, because if we don't talk about our successes and the stuff that we get to do well, nobody else is going to do it. We can't just be the team that's grumpy, that is overly political, that doesn't get invited to play with Legos or to go to parties because we tell too many gloom and doom tales. More than any other job, security requires us to convince people to change their behavior. If we're all as good at social engineering as we say we are, we would have already gotten all of this done. Another thing that's really important is to make sure we're marketing our work. Lots of security folks hate marketing. Sorry, guys and gals. Security is a marketing job. Fight me. Marketing teams define identity. They have to do all kinds of things that look really, really close to monitoring, alerting, detection, threat intelligence. They just have to do it differently. Marketing teams also have to understand people, how people pay attention, if people pay attention, what they're likely to read, what they're not going to read, and generally how to get attention and to get people to show up. We could use some help on that front, definitely. Some days we have to be better salesmen and saleswomen for the services that we provide our organizations. And we have to make sure that when we are successful at something, or we can provide improvement, or we can bring something important to the table, we have that as our talking points, and we stick to them. We nail them. When we repeat ourselves in the places where we are successful, it's not us just boasting. Repetition is key to helping people learn and key to helping people remember. Another thing the marketing team will teach you is you have to be really cognizant of your audience and what's going to work for them. Most people's attention spans are shorter than ever. I think right now, after about 11 seconds, if a YouTube video isn't entertaining enough, people just skip on to the next one. If you only have 11 seconds of someone's attention span, if you only have 11 seconds to get one thing about your work to your non-technical user or to your development team, how are you going to use it? First off, you can't bury the lead in any of your security communications. You have to be clear, you have to be concise. Go ask your marketing team about what a good call to action looks like. You have to remember, no one's going to read a giant wall of text. There's a reason bullet points, bolding things, italicizing things, lots of arrows and emojis, and funness pointing where you need attention are what marketers do when they're trying to part us from our money, which they're very good at, by the way. Another thing to remember, if we're trying to market our work and we are trying to make people aware that we can be good colleagues and collaborators, we have to remember that humor can be really powerful. People will remember when you make them laugh. They will make you remember when you make them feel good, and when you've made them feel like they make a huge difference. And knowing how to help people connect, especially over food, with brown bag lunch, with education opportunities, with silly games, with throwing styrofoam balls at each other just because it's a Friday, that makes a huge difference. And then finally, if we really want to win more friends and we really want to influence people, we have to completely just reject most of the status quo around us. I mentioned earlier, my job is the butt of a few jokes because I work in blockchain land. If you have blockchain jokes, I don't want to hear them. I've heard them all already. Here's the thing. About a decade ago, when I started working in technology, I remember when the cloud was the butt of everyone's jokes. Except, I don't know about you guys, I just looked at Amazon's market cap for their web services. We didn't criticize the cloud out of existence. The market spoke. The market keeps giving them more and more and more money. I'm not saying that these blockchain kids are the cloud. I don't know what to do with these things. I just know how to protect people from them. But what I think is that if we just keep persisting in this behavior where we try to criticize things out of existence, not only are we not going to get anywhere, we're certainly not going to solve any of the shadow IT problems we have, and no one's going to listen to us when we're all running around with our hair on fire at the next thing that someone just slapped internet connectivity into. The main reason we should really be burning down our isolationist security team mindset is this. There are 7 billion human beings on this planet, and many of those people don't have the same education, experiences, or access to the internet that we do. We are never, ever going to get ahead of all of them, And if we can't beat them, we should probably at least try to get them to join us. We can't afford to make any more enemies, and we can't afford to alienate more people. As teams, we should always be recruiting. We should be trying to distribute our workload. We should be trying to make sure that security is synonymous with productivity and not slowing things down. The secure way to do something should be the only productive way to do something, period. And we really have to make sure that other people around us understand that the blue team isn't just a bunch of engineers who are grepping through code and doing fancy things on GitHub. By the way, those new security advisories are amazing. But we should work to be violently cross-functional with marketing, with legal, with HR, with anybody else who might be able to help us do our main job, which is to remove fear, remove uncertainty, remove doubt, and I don't know, help people use stuff better and keep people from getting hurt. Finally, I'm borrowing the conference theme a little bit, but it is really dangerous to be a security team or a security practitioner who is out there working by yourself to accomplish things on your own. The concept of being a single point of failure is part of our core principles for a reason. And too many awful people win when we're at war with one another. And that's not great. The toxic community and the industry infighting that we have doesn't get us anywhere. It just makes the criminals more successful, and the people who want us to not win get a few more steps ahead of us. Our job's already hard enough anyway, and lots of us want to actually fix things. We're not quite sure how the price for all of this is working out. We don't know if security problems are directly leading to people dying. We have no idea. But it kind of feels like we're not far from that. And that's not a reality that I think any of us want to have to wake up with one day and say, crap, I really should have been nicer to those other guys on the other side of the building. We have to have resiliency. We have to be able to recover when the going gets tough, and we have to make sure we have other resources to back us up when we need them the most. Finally, I have a couple of things I always love to say, but I will not read them word to word for you. Generally, though, we can't afford to isolate anyone, whether they're our teams, whether they are marketers, journalists, people who use technology, people who want to throw technology into the ocean. We have to figure out how to get along with everyone, and we have to be more compatible with all kinds of people coming from all kinds of places. It's the only way we're going to get people paying attention to the software we use and the behaviors that we need to see them practice. No one's going to want to hang out with you as a security team if they've found out you've been talking crap about them. If your users suspect that you think they're dumb, they'll figure it out quickly. If your users think that you don't care about them, the first place they're going to figure that out is with how well you maintain your documentation and how you treat them when something breaks or when an incident happens. Speaking poorly of the people who we are supposed to be protecting and defending doesn't make us better, and it doesn't make them safer. And then finally, I guess the real point of all of this talking I've been doing is pretty simple. We have to change what we are doing as an industry to be well-rounded, well-informed, and much more emotionally intelligent than we actually are. Dare I say we probably have to figure out what that empathy thing is if we haven't done it already. We need to be able to embrace people from all over the place. We have to recruit for diversity of experience, for curiosity, and we have to find people who want to do lifelong learning and who aren't exhausted every time they have to go pick up a new language or a new tool or, figure out what the hell OS query did the last time that it threw a weird alert. We have to stop digging our collective feet in the sand. Code can be learned. We don't have to make everyone be a computer scientist. When I was in college, I looked at what they were trying to teach me and said, no, this is crap. No one's going to actually be using this by the time I go work in technology. I wasn't wrong, so I would like to summon 18-year-old me back and find out what other brilliant things she had going on in her brain. But the technology that I work on didn't exist a decade ago. The language that we use to write it, Go, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wasn't around when I was in university either. I'm not a good engineer because I went to college and learned it. I'm a good engineer because I know I don't know everything, but I'm willing to at least try to figure it out, and I want to be surrounded with people like me who will do the same thing. Thank you very much for listening to me rant and tell lots and lots of security stories.
I'll ask you one quick follow-up question.
Yep.
Thank you, Jessy. A wonderful call to arms there. For people who are inspired by what you say and they want to go back to their workplaces, not tomorrow, let's say Monday, and implement, what are 3 short, sharp bits of advice people can do, real things they can do to move towards those goals that you're enunciating this morning?
So there's a few different things. For one, start looking for ways that you can partner with other teams and you can use projects that they're working on to drive your security goals. You can throw out your security roadmap and say, okay, never let a good crisis go to wait. There are 2 crises where we can make this one thing we want to do happen much faster than we even planned on. Another thing we can do is to make sure that we are fun and welcoming and inviting. Having snacks in your corner is actually a good thing because people get hungry. People forget their lunch. And people really, really, really like chocolate or beef jerky. And then finally, just thinking about how we talk to other people and making sure that we are using inclusive language. We're not using jargon when we're talking to, an administrative assistant. We are explaining things in very human terms. People's eyeballs glaze over when we start talking about encryption and all of these protocols and the alphabet soup of technology. We got to do better and at least give them something tangible to work with.
Chocolate or beef jerky? That's my takeaway there. Give her a round of applause. Grab your little Zelda chess set on the way, Jessy. Great stuff.
Thank you.
The wonderful Jessy Irwin there from Tendermint. Our next speaker, just before I introduce our final speaker before morning tea, this afternoon when we wrap up AusCERT, if this is your first one, we do it with the famous AusCERT speed debate. If you haven't seen it before, it's absolute mental mayhem here on the stage as 9 speakers knock over 6 debate topics in the course of about 40 minutes, speaking for 1 minute each on each topic. There's truth bombs, there's a bit of fun, really interesting, not deep dive, very quick dive into half a dozen big issues facing the industry. That's the speed debate at about 3:45 this afternoon. Our next speaker from the wonderful people at Mimecast, sponsors of AusCERT. We couldn't do it without them. Please give Garrett O'Hara a big round of applause. All yours, Garrett.
Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everybody. We did, on Wednesday, I was chatting to the CoFens guys about how this would go, and we thought maybe Mimecast should have sponsored travel pillows at McDonald's, and instead of me talking, the guys played Whale Song just to get over last night, but thanks for coming along. So I work in Mimecast, and as part of my job, I get to talk to folks like yourselves about security all the time. So we talk about the security stack, we talk about incident response, SIEM, SOAR, all that kind of stuff. But the conversation over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years, seems to always come back to humans. And a couple of things that actually Jessy has kind of already spoken about, I'm kind of going to do a bit of a deep dive into that. So given it's about humans, I kind of want to start with some biology, and specifically the notion of defensive reactivity, which is basically something that happens in your amygdala, or your lizard brain is probably how you guys would know it. And it's the thing that when we didn't live in sort of safe environments like offices or go to the Marriott Hotel for conferences, back when we were on the planes, we had to fight saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths. It's essentially our emergency response system, and it's the thing that protected us. So the important thing here really is that it's an instinctual thing. It's not something anyone intentionally chooses. It just happens. When there's a perceived threat, this thing happens to us. You will see things like raised cortisol levels, your heart rate will go up, blood flow will increase. So it's the kind of flight or flight response. You're alert, you're going to run faster, you're probably going to be able to fight better than you would normally. But what you probably don't want to do is sit down to do like Sudoku or crosswords or those kind of things. And you can't control this, but it's responsible for many of the issues that we see in terms of that user awareness, the change in end user behavior, some of which Jessy spoke to already. So ultimately, negativity causes defensiveness, and defensive people can't really hear. So humans are awful. Now, by that, I don't mean if people flew in, which many of us did, that we took the armrest from the person that sat in the middle row, or that we put the toilet paper so it rolls to the inside against the wall instead of outside, which is what everybody should be doing. Really mean more in terms of the inbuilt things that we have as humans that can affect how we do things like communicate. So often what we say, we think we've said one thing, but what's being understood is something else. We have to make assumptions. If you didn't make assumptions, you would go crazy, right? There's so much information that flows in any given day that you really have to be able to do that to survive in the world. The flip side is that it actually also causes problems sometimes in terms of the assumptions that we make. Things like the Dunning-Kruger effect, which has been much publicized over the last few years. So that notion that if you're really confident about something, it often correlates to a lack of skill or competence sometimes. And I'm sure everyone's probably experienced the senior leadership where you see a massive amount of confidence, but actually not a whole lot of competence sometimes. So it's kind of a fairly common thing. But ultimately, it's about emotions and the fact that if we've had too much to drink, if we've had a late night, not enough caffeine or sleep, that we're going to be affected emotionally by that stuff. And that plays into many different things. So things like our ability to make decisions and good decisions, or understand things like risk. And these amazingly enthusiastic guys who are having a barbecue and also wanted to be in the paddle pool at the same time. If you think about the average security person, a CISO, going into a essentially complex operating environments of companies that may have been around for decades, where legacy systems have got their tentacles into all the sort of business operations, that's a really hard environment to operate in and to make good decisions. And being human doesn't help us. Change is hard. At a personal level, anyone who's ever given up cigarettes, it's a nightmare. That thing where you're at a conference like this, but you can go outside and have a cigarette and talk to people, and it's a hard thing to give away. It's a known pattern. It's safe. It feels good. At an organizational level, similar stuff. We kind of know what works, and changing sometimes is hard because often there's that dip in productivity in the short term for an outcome that maybe is understood but is also kind of a bet, because it's never binary. It's never it's going to work. It's always we think it's going to work. So that stuff is hard too. I'm going to really focus today on the communication side of things, because that really is where the conversations that I've been having lately seem to land all the time. And the notion that, again, as humans, we get things wrong. You know, we think we're being understood, but actually when you sort of talk to people, they haven't really understood what you've said. We choose the wrong modes of communication. We choose the wrong type of language that we use. And these things are all related, so how they play together is reasonably well understood. You need to make good decisions and kind of understand how we are as humans. After those decisions have been made, they need to be communicated well for change to be effective, and essentially you see the beautiful circle of life take place. So, starting with looking at communicating up or across, depending on where you are within an organization, and I think this reflects some of what Jessy has sort of spoken to already, the notion that quite often when we are trying to get buy-in for projects, spend on technology, really any change or program of works in cybersecurity, you hear comments like Miko yesterday where he asked, the board asked him why they were spending 50,000 euros on security when they didn't have a security problem. And the comment that we don't have a cleaning problem, so why should we pay for cleaners? That points to the problem here. I think Michael also commented, there was a question something like, are we secure? And that's obviously an impossible question to answer, but it points to a disconnect in communication. A big part of that is the language that we use. So we obviously in this industry have our vernacular, it's almost like, it's not slang, but it's the things we use to communicate, and it seems cross-site scripting, it's CVEs, vulnerabilities, all the language and the things that we say on a kind of daily basis. If I'm a business, on the business side, in finance or on a board, that's not my language. My language is productivity, it's the P&L, it's shareholder value, it's risk mitigation, and there's definitely a disconnect there. And you see that. Tanium did a report on this stuff, and the board members for some of the most highly vulnerable companies, when they responded to their survey, didn't know or weren't able to interpret cybersecurity reports. So this is a kind of a well-established problem that exists within the industry. I'm going to point to this book. If you guys haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's by Phil Zongo. He came from governance background, but has written, honestly, one of the best books in terms of cyber resilience that I've seen. And he talks to this notion of how do you communicate and what's useful for a board to understand cybersecurity. So he talks about things like unambiguous and relatable information for a board. He talks about aligning the conversation to a board with business outcomes and business strategy. And obviously that encompasses the crown jewels, the high-value digital assets, but ultimately it has to be a business conversation, not a cybersecurity or technology conversation. The notion of pointless metrics is another big one. So look, we see the thing where people will report in our industry sometimes on the number of spam messages that are blocked per quarter or per month. And it's a big number often, so it could be 5 million, 10 million messages. Is that good or is it bad? If I'm a business, if I sit on the business side of things, I don't really know. What's the impact if that number went up or went down? So making sure that the metrics that are used are not pointless is obviously fairly critical. But ultimately, it's about being brief, be concise, but being relevant to the business in the communications to the board. The other side of the fence then is when you're not communicating up or across is the conversation to end users. And Jessy covered this pretty well, I think. I'm going to echo a lot of what she said. These are the people who sit on the front desk. They sit in HR, they drive the trucks, they're working logistics, finance, legal, whatever it is. They're not us, they're the other people. And there's really two sides, I believe, to the issue here. The first one is that we get a couple of things wrong. So we have people who are experts in security, CISOs, InfoSec personnel, security experts, who are brilliant at their jobs, but then they're forced into I think Jessy called them squishy skills, the notion that they then have to somehow be really, really good at this other thing, which is communication. And I think that's kind of unfair, and it's generally not very effective. We choose interesting modes of communication. We left a little handout there, the little page, which is an example of a security email bulletin, the things that get sent around quite often on a monthly basis. And I would question their effectiveness as the reality. It's something that often has to be done for compliance reasons, but there are better modes of communication that are available to us now, things like video, things like potentially face-to-face or instructor-led training. But that's kind of where the conversation needs to go to. And really important that we kind of start to drop the jargon and we use punchy messaging that will cut through to the folks who are generally just not as interested and don't care as much as we think they do. So these are people who are extremely busy. They have their boss who already is annoyed with them because the 10 things they were expected to do haven't been done. So they've got office politics. They've just got so much other stuff going on that when that email arrives in, do they care? They honestly generally don't. And that's where we start to kind of run into problems. And we end up with this guy. And Jessy kind of mentioned the idiot notion. I've heard some really funny metrics within security teams. They're kind of amusing. They don't get shared with the wider team. So one of them was the clown rate, the Muppet metric. Variations on the users being kind of silly people who don't really kind of get this stuff. And I'm going to challenge that and say that actually it's not on them, it's kind of on us. And we've used really ineffective communication to an audience that is really generally pretty disinterested. And I believe that comes from the notion of compliance, where really what we've done is a box-ticking exercise. We've got a requirement to maybe have 95% of people watch the LMS video on security. So generally what they will do, if they're anything like me, is they'll play the video on their second screen, and then on the primary screen, they'll just continue working. The little box pops up to say, do you accept that you've completed this module? You tick yes, and you go about your day, but nothing has actually changed. And I think we need to be much more aligned with a behavior change model. And that's much more messy. It's not as clean, but it does use emotion to cut through to get to the end users. And I'd echo the use of the advertising approach. That works. We know that works. If you think about the advertising industry, they're masters at getting us to buy things or change behavior. They would never use what's on your table there, which is a wall of text. That just doesn't work that way. This isn't a cybersecurity problem. This is very much a human problem where you have important information being transmitted to a completely disinterested audience. So that could be, back when I smoked, I would probably do exactly what that guy is doing, because there was times where I really just wanted a cigarette. The little old lady's tired. She's not going to see that wet paint sign. She's tired. It's not part of what's important to her in that given moment. Or the Beamer driver. I still don't really know how that happens, but there you go. So this is a human problem, and that's kind of where we are. This is Leo the Labradoodle. He's actually my friend and colleague Ryan's dog. He lives in Melbourne with Ryan. And you can see here, he's way more successful than I've ever been on social media. He's got 1,300 followers, and this is a few months old, so he's probably doing even more than that now. But this is the world we live in, where employees don't just have their own social media accounts, but I know many people who have their pets on things like on Instagram, and they have their own accounts, they've got their own followers, and that's kind of where we're at. So what we're actually competing with is these dopamine hitters, the 11-second YouTube video thing, that's what we're competing with. But yet we're still sending out emails that are just dry, boring, and will never resonate with the end users. So you've got Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, Skype, and Twitter. People probably have mobile phones sitting on their desks that's going to beep when a new message comes in on their friends group in WhatsApp, or if somebody likes the photo of the sandwich that they ate for lunch. But those things are constantly happening. So not only do you have really important information that you need to get through to a disinterested audience, but they're also massively distracted. And what you don't have is people who look like this. And there you go. So there's probably some people who know exactly what happened there, and then there's a bunch of people who are wondering, why did people throw airplanes? We actually changed it. Normally we have people just roll them into balls and throw them at the stage, so it looks like they're kind of really not digging the talk. That little sheet of paper on your table, one of the bullet points near the end says something along the lines of, if you throw a paper airplane onto the stage, we actually have a winner here, that you have the option to win a $100 Visa card. So we have a winner, which is Shane Madison, wherever you are. Come and see me. Nice job, Shane. Yeah, round of applause. That was awesome. Like the point of that is just like it's a funny thing, but that's what happens every single time. Some people will have read it, most people won't. And that's kind of the issue with a lot of these comms. So we still talked with Dan Gregory from the Grew and Transfer, or the Impossible Institute last year at the ASA conference, actually, who were supporters of AusCERT. And he used one of the best analogies I've seen for our industry, which is the thing where you get on a plane and the airlines legally are required to tell you this really important information that may save your life. But when people get on the plane, what they're really thinking about is the Long Island iced tea they'll have in the swim bar in Thailand, or that the airplane pulled away from the gate a couple of minutes late, so they're maybe going to be late for their meeting, or will the kids go feral, or will they watch the entertainment system? But it's that rather than counting the number of rows to the exit, which may be behind you. People don't pay attention. So it's a perfect analogy for our industry. A completely disinterested audience, really important information. And what you saw was this transformation where organizations like Virgin Atlantic started becoming much more informal. They introduced kind of cartoony safety booklets in the back of seats. And all of a sudden, people started becoming engaged, and it evolved to the point where you have barely concealed nudity. So this is Air, New Zealand Air. This is body paint, so that guy's actually naked. Same exact legal requirements, but now built into a kind of much more consumable and memorable format. And I feel okay with having a nipple on the screen, given that Miko basically said the full version of Mofo yesterday, and there was a naked person on the previous slide. I was a little bit kind of like, should we do this? But this is where we go. You can see how this works. So there's some considerations here in terms of how this all ties together. The comms to end users, like there's things to think about. The cadence of communications. You want it to be, like in our experience around monthly is good. If it goes too often, it starts to become part of the noise that people just kind of eliminate and ignore every time they see it. The mode needs to be correct. So it could be an email, but the email needs to be written in a way, to Jesse's point, it uses bold, it's got a single punchy message that is actionable and that people will remember, rather than long verbose emails that are full of kind of technical jargon. They don't work. Things like short videos, generally humor is incredibly good at cutting through. Again, pointing to the advertising industry, how often do the ads that we remember use humor for us to kind of relate to them? That's a fairly common approach. And what you want to get to is the state where you've created social norms within the organization that you're in, or trying to affect change within, where people will look to the leadership. And that's absolutely critical, by the way. You need the leadership bought into this stuff, because if they're not, the employees will just look at them and say, well, if they're not doing it, why should I? So what you want to get to is, you look at the leadership, you look left, you look right, and employees realize that if they step away from their laptops, they should hit Windows L. They shouldn't let people walk through the turnstile right behind them. They shouldn't click on every single link in every single email that comes through, even for companies that they're not the customer of. But you build up those social norms within your organization. So I'm going to kind of close out with this notion of advertising. And I was talking to a guy called Lachlan on Wednesday, who may or may not be here, about this. And we got into a conversation about Guinness. So I thought it was a good one to include here in terms of advertising. I'm from Ireland, so I love Guinness. But if I ever had an advertisement sent to me like this, I'm going to zone out. I don't care. It's too dry. It's too wordy. It's never going to change my mind. But if you consider something like this, and I'm guessing Australians may probably remember this guy, the Emperor Nazi Goring, see some kind of smiles and some nods. This is the guy who told his kid that the Great Wall of China was built to keep the rabbits out, and it was built by Emperor Nazi Goring. Like, it was a silly, sort of funny ad, and everybody probably remembers how human and relatable it was. The little kid at the end kind of ruffling his hair, about to get up in front of his class and give the talk on the Great Wall of China. It cuts through. We all remember that. Or this lady, Deborah Kennedy, back in 2000, who uttered the now infamous words, "Not happy, Jan," and they're part of our vernacular. They've become something that everybody kind of knows what that means. Again, based on a fairly funny video in an advertising mode that's 20 years old now, but we still use that phrase. So I'm going to say that, like, lots of amazing stuff has happened. If you look at the technology that's available outside, it's incredible. This industry has just changed so much in the last 4 years. It's astonishing. But I'm going to challenge us and say that actually the part where we communicate and that squishy stuff, that maybe we don't do that as well as we could, and that we need to really look at moving the needle of behavior change or user behavior using behavior change models much more than compliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Please take your Zelda chess set as a thank you for that presentation. We're going to morning tea now. We'll be back here this afternoon for the speed debate and prize presentation. See you all then. Parallel streams until then. Enjoy your morning tea. Jessy, Garrett, thank you very much. And don't forget to hop on the app and give us feedback about each of the speaker sessions during the course of the 2 days. Let us know what you really liked. We'll see you here at 3:45.